A year after Radiant Black's release, it was revealed that he was only part of a larger universe. Image Comics launched a brand new comic universe spearheaded by a chromatic ensemble of helmeted heroes, each bringing with them a different story and starring a cast just as colorful. Another year passed and now it's time for another Cross of Fates. To prepare for it, I'd like to recap the events so far in chronological order. A few quick disclaimers first. 1. Spoilers, obviously. 2. I'm going to recount the events as best as chronologically accurate as I can get them, and so some story beats may read as odd, but that's only because I'm telling parts that happen in chronological order as opposed to release order, which is the best way to enjoy these comics. 3rd, I know this video, though touching on every major event in important detail, won't and can't replace actually reading these comics. I hope you guys know that too, and will be interested enough to read along as well, even if it's only one series that interests you. Smaller character beats, relationships, and especially the art will be glossed over here, so there'll be that waiting for those still interested. With all that, we can start catching up. The timeline's first recorded event takes place in the 1400s. A knight in flaming black armor fights a demon. His name is Caleb, and he tells us he's the first to don the Knight's Sun armor and has dedicated his life to protecting the earth from magical threats. We'll eventually come back to this story, but this sets the precedent that magic exists in the world. From there, we jump all the way to the 1960s where the story of Cal takes place. Cal is a series written by Radiant Black writer Kyle Higgins, and unfortunately all I can say about it is that it takes place in the 1960s. The 11-issue story of Cal was written back in 2014, but was retroactively added way later to the Massiverse, and because of that, I never really got around to reading it. To be fair though, because it was tacked on after the fact, its story and characters don't and probably won't ever play a part in the Massiverse, aside from cameos and Easter eggs. The timeline really starts in the 1980s with Wendell. Wendell is a husband, expecting parent, and the prized engineer at a factory. His story begins optimistically with the promise of a promotion, but unfortunately, it would only stay as a promise. His life crumbles as time goes on. The factory has him lay off workers, and eventually they let him go as well. His wife would divorce him, and his relationship with his daughter would be less than ideal. Now in 2020, Wendell is left working at a Best Buy when he runs into an old employee. The old employee sympathizes with Wendell and offers a contracting job. Wendell gets hired to repair some lights at an abandoned building set for renovation. Once there, Wendell actually finds 2 radiant black holes. After touching the yellow radiant, he transforms into radiant yellow and is given the power of future vision and is flooded with glimpses of past, present, and future. A robot voice calls out to him, telling him that for the duration of his life, he is part of existence. Wendell then runs out of the building with a look of dread, saying he must fix something. Whatever Wendell saw into the future had him scared enough to act and kick things into motion. Around this time, Inferno Girl Red's story begins. Her story actually takes place in a totally different dimension, but I swear it doesn't complicate things at all, I promise. Cassia Costa and her mother Anna are driving to their new home in the futuristic utopia of Apex City. There, Cassia has been admitted to its prestigious high school. On the drive there, her mother regales her with the story of how she was once saved from a monster by the superhero Inferno Girl Red. They arrive to the school, and despite being intimidated and nervous, Cassia settles in and has her first class with world-renowned physicist and school director, Dr. Caro. Here, she also meets her roommate, Harriet. Later that evening, Cassia visits a library where elsewhere, a mysterious figure in black casts a spell that causes the entire city to be lifted off and sent into space. During the commotion, a red object meteors onto Cassia's location. The object is a bracelet that latches onto Cassia like the Omnitrix. A force field is then shown covering and protecting the city. Cassia catches up with her mother and shows her the bracelet to Anna's surprise. Cassia then gets a call from her roommate saying that a monster has trapped her in her dorm room. Cassia's mother hears this and urges Cassia to go rescue her using the bracelet and gives her instructions on how to transform. Reluctantly, Cassia heads over to her roommate and spots the monster. She readies herself and gets the monster's attention. She activates the bracelet and transforms into Inferno Girl Red. She defeats the monster and is cheered on by civilians. She flies away and quickly rejoins her mother and bluntly tells her that she doesn't want to do this ever again. We'll come back to this story in a bit. Back to the main universe, Eva is a streamer and social media influencer who often overworks herself, a fault her girlfriend takes issue with. Eva is currently making sure that a live ad read goes well, but an unexpected mishap breaks her mic mid-ad read and forces her to stop her stream. Desperate, she runs to Best Buy where she meets Wendell, who says that though they don't have any more mics in stock, he can fix it for her after the store closes tonight. Eva takes up his offer and leaves to have lunch with her girlfriend. The lunch date sadly ends in a hurtful argument, however. Eva then retreats to Best Buy and opens up to Wendell, who gives her some good advice. Later, they both head to that boarded-up building where Wendell found the Radiance. He then urges Eva to touch the pink Radiant. When she does, she transforms into Radiant Pink and is given the power to portal jump anywhere in space. A voice tells her that she is part of existence for the duration of her life. After hours of portal hopping, Eva visits her girlfriend to surprise her. She unfortunately gets the opposite reaction when her girlfriend scolds her for adding something so massive to her already countless list of responsibilities. They break up then and there, and Eva retreats to the beach. Wendell finally catches up with her and asks her what's wrong. They have another heart-to-heart and leaves Eva feeling better. This is where we'll leave Radiant Pink for now. Back to Inferno Girl Red's story. Anna takes reluctant superhero Cassia to a cafe where she gives the "with great power comes great responsibility" speech and insists that Cassia try embracing the powers and using them for good, also because she doesn't know how to actually remove the bracelet. Anna then reveals that she actually used to work with the original Inferno Girl. Using her skills as a journalist, she helped find leads and IGR would follow up on them. The plan is for Cassia to lie low while Anna tracks down whoever's responsible for Apex City's departure. Anna figures it's likely an old cult called the Cabal that's done this. And with that, Cassia begins the life of a teenage superhero, fighting monsters on school nights, homework, and failing at having a love life. Sometime later, Anna tells Cassia that she followed a Cabal member around and discovered a meeting taking place. They both spy on the gathering and would get exposition in an argument between this Dark Knight and the other Cabal members. The plan was to transport the city to their master, but the force field that was put up by a mysterious third party stopped the process. The new plan is to construct a teleporter that can get things through the force field. The Cabal heckles the Knight some more until he kills one of them, which prompts IGR to jump in. She's no match for him, however, and is quickly beaten. Anna runs in and tries to help her daughter. The Knight actually remembers who Anna is and calls her by her name. Before the Knight can kill Anna, IGR grabs her and they fly away to safety. After landing somewhere safe, Anna urges her to go back. Cassia de-helmets and is in bad shape. Anna sees the physical toll that her daughter has taken on and she backs down, comforting Cassia. We then see that the school's director, Dr. Caro, was eavesdropping on their conversation. The next day, Dr. Caro walks into Cassia's class to give words of encouragement. Her pep talk is interrupted by a loudspeaker's report of a monster attack on school grounds. IGR flies to the scene with Anna there too. Inferno Girl Red focuses on the monster, but it turns out it was all just a distraction. The Knight appears knowing that Anna would be there. He kidnaps her while IGR is occupied. After Cassia defeats the monster, she looks around for her mother, but after seeing her belongings on the ground, she realizes that Anna's been kidnapped. We'll come back to Inferno Girl Red. Back to the main dimension, English teacher Satomi Son and her fiancé drive home one night to find a man in a suit waiting for them. The man greets them and says that he needs to speak to Satomi's fiancé. She listens into their conversation and learns that her fiancé has relapsed into his gambling addiction and owes the bank a lot of money. Satomi offers that they use some of her grad school savings to help pay off the debt, but he shoots down the idea. While the two are in bed, Satomi's unable to sleep and decides to visit his office for more answers. She doesn't find any and ends up leaving. Before she does, however, she sees two meteors collide. The red streak meteor crashes next to her and sends her falling down a pit. As she's falling, she touches the meteor, which was actually the Red Radiant. She transforms into Radiant Red and is given the power to transmute matter. She then absorbs the falling debris around her to create leg armor that breaks her fall. A voice tells her that for the duration of her life, she is part of existence. She contemplates what just happened and rolls with having superpowers. The next day, she visits her bank inquiring about loan options to remedy her fiancé's debt. The banker says there's nothing they can do for them because of his financial history. Satomi insists that hers is different and to pull up her own account. But upon doing so, the banker tells her that her account is empty with her 10 grand in savings gone. Satomi waits at home for her fiancé. When he arrives, she asks, "Where's my money?" He plays dumb, to which she explodes that he forged her signature and emptied her account. She argues that she could have helped him had she known from the beginning. He reveals that the situation is actually worse than she thought, and says that she shouldn't have gotten involved in the first place. He continues to berate her until she punches a wall and brings up that they're in this mess because of him. She storms out of the room, saying that she can't do this anymore. Before she leaves the house, he says he's sorry. We then see Satomi walk over to a car and start absorbing it for muscle and armor. This gives her a masculine physique. She walks towards a bank and effortlessly breaks in. She arrives home to her fiancé's shock and asks what she did. She replies, "I handled it," as she holds duffel bags full of money. This is where we'll leave Radiant Red for now. Going back to Inferno Girl Red one last time, Cassie returns home feeling defeated. Her roommate Harriet gives her a shoulder to cry on, and that lets Cassie confide in her that she's Inferno Girl Red and is facing an overwhelming obstacle. After talking some more, they deduce that since the enemy is trying to teleport things in and out of the city, they're probably utilizing a lot of energy, and so the power grid might have the answer. And that eventually takes Cassia to the right location. She crashes into a lab where she finds her mother trapped in a glass column. The Dark Knight turns out to be one of Cassia's teachers. He has a transformation sequence as well and is named the Griffin. They begin to fight, and the Griffin reveals that his and his master's plan is to correct nature, that the Big Bang was a mistake, and that equilibrium must be restored. The Griffin eventually gets the upper hand and proceeds to crush the Dragon Gem on Inferno Girl Red's bracelet. This reverts Cassia back to normal. Cassia is given some last words, and she monologues herself into a revelation about the power of belief, and asks Griffin if he believes in magic. He fires at her, and she raises her bracelet with a smile and transforms into a new superpowered form, Inferno Girl Red, blazing. Sensing impending defeat, the Griffin activates the teleporter and is met with a knee to the face. Inferno Girl Red demands he stop the process, but he says it's too late. He fires once more at her, but she answers back with a dragon blast that finally defeats him. The teleporter is damaged in the process, however, and it begins to transport Anna to an unknown location. They share parting words as Anna disappears and Cassia kneels defeated. She eventually returns home and tells Harriet that she stopped the cabal, but her mother disappeared to who knows where. Dr. Caro listens in, and after hearing that Anna has vanished, she runs out to them and apologizes profusely to Cassia. Cassia puts together that it was Dr. Caro who put up the force field and was also the first Inferno Girl Red. Dr. Caro urges Cassia to continue believing in herself if they want to make it out of this. Despite having a beat-up face, she says she will, showing Cassia has grown her resolve. This is the end of Inferno Girl's story for now. Finally arriving to the one who started it all, Radiant Black, Nathan Burnett is on a call with the bank, begging they give him a loan to help alleviate his outstanding credit card debt. Nathan is a struggling writer who tried to break out in Los Angeles, but instead it just broke him. They tell him no and he breaks down crying. Fast forward to him moving back to his parents in Illinois. While unpacking, childhood best friend Marshall appears and wants to celebrate Nathan's return. The two go out drinking and Nathan confides in Marshall about his financial situation. After a while, they leave the bar, and before they head home, Marshall spots the final Radiant hovering over the train tracks. Nathan reaches out and transforms into Radiant Black. A voice tells him that he is part of existence for the duration of his life. The commotion draws the attention of some police officers who tell them to get off the train tracks. Before they're hit by an oncoming train, Nathan uses his powers of gravity bending to lift everyone and the train off the ground. Nathan puts everyone down and flies off with Marshall. The two land on a silo and have a heart-to-heart, and Marshall comforts Nathan, saying that as a writer he can use this unique experience to help him set apart. They return home, and the next day the police officers track down Nathan, but instead of arresting him, they actually need his help. They say that the night prior, a red version of him robbed a bank and insist Nathan help the best he can. Nathan reluctantly agrees to help, and through his own means, he figures out Radiant Red's location and drives there. Once he spots Radiant Red, he transforms into Radiant Black. Nathan jumps in unprepared and gets beaten up. When he comes to, he finds that Red has stolen his car. He flies up to Red and catches the car with a stasis hold and grabs the duffel bags of money too. Red manages to escape, and Radiant Black is left with duffel bags of money, and does the right thing and returns it. Nathan would practice being a friendly neighborhood superhero, helping where he can and uncovering more about the Radiant and its powers. Eventually, a giant mechanical entity within the Radiant reaches out to Nathan in a space called Existence. Here, the robot tells Nathan that there's a war coming, and that in order for his planet to survive, Nathan must be willing to kill. Nathan unfortunately is unable to commit to that act, and the robot bluntly tells him that his world will die. While Nathan and Marshall are out one day, they are ambushed by Radiant Red. Radiant Black and Red begin to fight, and Red tells Nathan that he knows who he is, where his parents live, and will ruin his life if he continues to intervene with her robberies. Hearing this, Nathan becomes enraged and overpowers Red. The two fire a beam at each other and the shockwave compromises the building they're in. They both hold up the building as long as they can to let everyone escape, and in his final effort, Nathan blasts Red out of the building as it collapses on top of him. Marshall watches in horror, and as the dust settles, we see Nathan's body where the Radiant is rescinding from his body. Out of panic, grief, and anger, Marshall reaches out and grabs the Radiant. For a brief moment, Marshall is in existence talking to the robot. The robot asks him the same question, if he's willing to kill, and Marshall says he is. Marshall comes back from existence, and after a prayer, Nathan coughs up blood. Paramedics say that they're getting no brain activity and proceed to take Nathan to the hospital. Overwhelmed, Marshall transforms and flies away. He ends up pleading with the robot that he'll do whatever the robot asks if he helps track down Radiant Red. Sometime later, Marshall finds Red and the two duke it out. Marshall gets the upper hand, and an unmasked Radiant Red begs for mercy, saying she didn't mean to hurt Nathan, just scare him. Their fight is then interrupted when Radiant Pink and Radiant Yellow portal in, skipping over introductions and just warning them that he's here. They're all taken by surprise by a fifth party that cuts them all down. It turns into a 4v1 against an unknown assailant, but they're all outclassed and they're forced to retreat with Pink's portals. Radiant Black flies everyone to keep moving while Pink recharges. Yellow explains the mystery attackers after the Radiants and somehow always knows where they go. On cue, the Radiant Nemesis knocks out Radiant Black, and Radiant Pink rushes to teleport everyone to safety. She gets to Black before the enemy, but the speed and panic cause Pink to portal them into deep space. They take a moment to catch their breath, but it's quickly interrupted when they realize that they are in the middle of a large-scale space battle. Two giant robots then turn their attention to them. Pink, with the help of Black, manages to teleport back to Earth. Meanwhile, Red and Yellow stumble upon the Radiant Nemesis unconscious. They quickly trap him under reinforced logs. When he comes to, Radiant Yellow starts interrogating him, but he gets no answers. In this same issue, we also get a flashback of 001 floating in space and badly beaten up. He comes to and gets in a ship and heads to Earth. Behind him tails an arsenal unit. Back to the present, 001 says his suit got fully charged off of being in close proximity to the Radiants and teleports out of the restraints. Their fight goes back and forth when Pink and Black portal back into the fight. Radiant Black and Nemesis talk a bit, and we learn that his name is actually 001 and is marked for death by Catalyst. Before they even have a chance to fight, the robot's arm reaches out from Marshall's chest and grabs 001, pulling him in. Confused but ultimately relieved that the fight is over, the other Radiants start to head home, hoping to return to some normal. With 001 out of commission, that unit I mentioned earlier was left unguarded. This man here named Greg managed to find out about this alien storage unit and was tasked with opening it up. He hires the help of two engineers named Jason Riley, and the two crack the unit open and they see what's inside. It's around this time that No One's story begins. Over in Pennsylvania, a hacker and activist only known as No One begins doxing several powerful people who had gone away with committing terrible crimes. No One took it upon himself to expose these awful men in the hopes that they are brought to justice. No One didn't expect, however, that a lone vigilante would take matters into their own hands. That vigilante began executing No One's doxed targets in a string of murders police would call the accountability murders, and nicknamed the serial killer Richard Rowe. All the bodies are shot 4 times in the chest, but 5 shell casings are always found at the crime scenes. No one would make a public statement condemning the killings. One night, Richard Rowe attempts to murder another doxed victim when No One himself intervenes and stops them. Richard Rowe would eventually be apprehended by the police when an anonymous tip lets them know where they're held up. Richard Rowe's real identity would be kept secret from the public for an unknown reason. We'll pick up on this story later. Jumping back to that open storage unit, this is where Shift's story begins. Now in the possession of Radiant Tech, Jason Riley constructs high-tech power suits to sell in the black market. Greg then reaches out to Guy, a mercenary for hire, and has him test out a Shift suit as well as charge the fuel cells that are needed to power the suits. Just like 001, the power cells that fuel the Radiant technology can be charged by just being in proximity to a Radiant. The plan is to wait for Radiant Black's location to turn up somewhere and have Guy slide Shift onto that location and charge the cells without being detected. We'll come back to Shift in just a moment. After the fight with 001, Marshall becomes Radiant Black for the course of nearly a year, and in that time, Marshall navigates being a superhero while visiting Nathan in the hospital, who's in a coma. He tries to fix his image by lighting up a banner over a highway. The banner, however, ends up causing several accidents. This brings us back to Shift. The fiasco alerts Greg and his crew where Radiant Black is, and they send in Shift. He successfully charges the power cells and returns to base. Shift starts to think and asks, why sell the suits when they can just keep them, rent them out, and charge to keep them powered? Jason and Riley get on board with this proposition, but not Greg, who actually gets violently angry at the change of plans. This forces Guy to kill him and take over the business. While Shift begins his new business venture, global tech company Morrow, remember them, reaches out requesting his services. They want him and another operator to assassinate a man leaking company information. After the hit job is successful, Shift offers his temporary partner a position as an operator in his business. Sometime later, a friend of Guy asks to be let in on the business. In exchange for a position in the business, he offers a lucrative job that can get them lots of money. With Shift's business needing the money, Shift accepts. The job is to simply break into a prison in Pennsylvania and record the identity of a high-profile murderer and sell that information as an NFT, that murderer being Richard Rowe. The break-in is successful and Shift leaks Richard Rowe's real identity as Aaron Kern, who we learn is one of the sons of the assistant police chief, Ben Kern. This is where we pick back up with No One. After Richard Rowe's identity is revealed, 2 copycat killers would fail and succeed at continuing the accountability movement. No one would apprehend them, but the copycat killings would still continue. Another body would then be reported. The body in question is identified as one of No One's original doxed victims and was executed in the same fashion as the other accountability murder victims. This confirms a 3rd copycat killer. We follow Assistant Police Chief Ben Kern as he attempts to help solve the case, but the department has barred him from doing so, given his son's identity as the original Richard Rowe murderer. Nonetheless, Ben would recover a note at the crime scene and bring it to his son in jail. Ben shows the note to Aaron, which reads, "I am the real Richard Rowe," and implies Aaron used this note as a way to escape accountability. Aaron rejects the notion, and that causes Ben to leave disgruntled. Ben returns home, and while still in his car, copycat number 3 approaches him and aims his gun at Ben. Before he fires, No One appears and begins beating copycat number 3. Unfortunately, the gun goes off and hits Ben. No One rushes to Ben's aid as the copycat escapes. The copycat will go on to hunt down one of Ben's other sons and successfully murder them. We'll come back to No One later. Coming back to Shift's final escapade, Guy wakes up to the sound of music and follows it to find a woman playing the cello, but abruptly stops. We learn that she and Guy go to the same neurologist. Guy has amnesia and can't remember life before working for Morrow, and this woman named Anja has tremors caused by a neurological disorder that prevents her from playing her cello. Guy reached out to Anja because one device that Jason Riley recovered was a sonic resonator. The controls for it are too complicated for the people that they've brought in to test it, and knowing Anja's background as a musician, he asked if she could try. She masters the controls quickly, and as a side effect, her tremors subside, which sparks interest in what Guy uses the technology for. Shift would go on to recruit Anja into the business, where her and other operators would all have run-ins with Marshall over the course of his year as Radiant Black. To go back a bit, a month after the 001 fight, Satomi Son, aka Radiant Red, would reach out to Marshall to try and make amends and apologize for what she did to Nathan. Not satisfied with her apology, he has her meet and apologize to Nathan in person. This is around the time that Satomi would begin her own story. At this point, Satomi is weighed down by the guilt of putting Nathan in a coma and not knowing what to do with the millions of dollars stashed in her home. Things get complicated when Guy appears in her classroom. He urges her to meet at a warehouse later that night and uses her family as leverage. She arrives, and after getting lava poured on top of her, she's ambushed by some guys in Shift. She fights them off, and the brawl ends when she spews the lava back out of her hands. A woman then appears and introduces herself as Margot, the boss of a crime syndicate and the owner of the banks that Satomi stole money from. Margot says that she drew out Satomi to test her and to recruit her for a job after seeing her abilities on the security footage. The job is a heist that requires a volatile substance called Mercury S to be extracted from a lab. Satomi's ability to absorb and bring back volatile liquids make her perfect for the job. Satomi initially refuses, but Margot persuades her to do the one job, and in return, she'll exchange Satomi's unusable bills for fresh ones. Satomi would practice for weeks absorbing liquids and bringing them back. During that time, she seeks out Marshall for help, makes contact with a giant robot, and tries to repair her strained marriage. Come time for the heist, the plan succeeds with a few hitches, and they make off with Satomi holding on to the substance. Predictably, Margot double-crosses Red and has her knocked out. Margot tells her that Satomi wasn't ever allowed to walk away after one job. Margot has a bound Owen dragged out and asks Satomi to decide to either work for the syndicate, free to be a badass, or refuse and have Owen be killed then and there. Satomi makes a heartfelt apology to Owen and decides to join Margot. With that, Shift takes Owen away. Margot then introduces Satomi to the rest of the higher-ups in the syndicate as they watch her expel the Mercury S. Really, it was all a trick. Satomi ends up transferring Mercury S through handshakes to Margot and the rest of the bosses, killing them all. She returns home to find Shift, who knew Satomi was tricking Margot. He proposes that they should take over the warehouse and run it themselves. She refuses and tells him to leave. In an odd move, he tells Owen he's the jealous type and tries to kill him. Satomi intervenes and the two have a grand fight. Red wins, but her home is destroyed in the process. Satomi then admits to Owen she did mean what she said before, that it's time for the two to grow on their own, and with no hard feelings, they part ways. Satomi only asks that Owen send some money to Nathan's family. Satomi would go on to face the consequences of her actions and turn herself in to the police. Declaring her name is Satomi Son, and she is Radiant Red. This is where Radiant Red's story ends for now. To jump quickly back to No One, a month after the attack on his life, Assistant Police Chief Ben Kern is picked up by another officer. The officer urges Ben to retire, but Ben refuses. A call over the radio announces another body has been found. The crime scene shows a body with 4 gunshot wounds and 5 shell casings recovered, the victim this time being a football coach for a local school. Hours go by as the crime scene investigations continue when an officer patrolling the area spots No One hiding. The police all begin to chase No One when he parkours the rooftops and eludes the police. Ben visits Aaron in jail and begs for help on the case. Aaron does admit that he was tipped off that the coach was a potential target. He says he had received a letter with the coach's schedule on it. With Ben in the hospital at that time, Aaron disclosed the letter to a journalist. Ben would find the newspaper that the journalist works for and finds out that the coach was part of a pay-to-play scheme, a motive for why Richard Rowe had killed him. Sometime later, Ben is asked to attend a press conference where State Senator and Richard Rowe target Noah Kemp would speak on the events happening to the city and on the vigilante No One. As the press conference plays, we see both Richard Rowe and No One watching. State Senator Kemp declares that he is creating a team to investigate and bring Richard Rowe, number 3, and No One to justice, and wants Ben to head the group. In a moment of clarity, Ben announces his retirement, effective immediately, and leaves. This is where No One's story leaves off. Finally coming back to Radiant Black, Marshall is suffering from nightmares of his comatose best friend until the day comes when they decide to unplug Nathan. As they start the process, Marshall panics and realizes that Nathan is savable. In Marshall's nightmares, he had knowledge that he couldn't possibly have had, which makes Marshall realize that Nathan is still in the Radiant somehow. Marshall manages to coax the robot into sending him into existence and retrieve his best friend. Once there, 001 is there to guide Marshall, saying he struck a deal with the robot. Should Marshall fail, he'll retrieve the Radiant. Throughout Marshall's journey in existence, he is repeatedly told that there is only truth in existence. Eventually, Marshall is confronted by the specter of Nathan, who goads him into admitting his truths. Marshall eventually breaks down, saying he is worthless and doesn't deserve to live, and just wants to swap places with Nathan, someone who he believes does deserve to live. And with the truth told, Marshall and Nathan are allowed to leave existence together. Around this time, the Dead Lucky story begins. Mexican-Chinese-American Bibiana Bibi Lopez Yang is a veteran and the sole survivor of her platoon nicknamed the Dead Lucky. She currently resides in San Francisco, where she helps run her parents' Mexican-Chinese-American barbecue fusion restaurant. We learn that devastating economic setbacks have given rise to crime in her city. Desperate, the government allowed San Francisco to be a guinea pig in a large experiment where global tech company Morrow would police the streets using advanced security robots and other technology. This occupation led to the formation of the Salvation Gang, which is composed of citizens as well as gang members who are against the invasion. Unfortunately, the Salvation Gang's tactics routinely put the people they claim to protect in danger. This is where Bibi comes in. The event that took the lives of her squad was also what gave her the power to manipulate electricity. With her electricity, she powers a mech called Ghost and uses it to keep Morrow and the Salvation Gang from hurting the neighborhood. She's not alone though. Childhood friend and former Morrow engineer, Eddie, aids her by constructing and fixing her mech. Besides Eddie, police officer Garcia would also help fight against the occupation. Bibi would go on to have run-ins with the Salvation Gang and eventually have her mech out of commission. Nonetheless, her interference gains popularity with the locals, and Morrow's CEO, Jimmy Moss, wants to put an end to it. He has his people pinpoint the Dead Lucky's location within Chinatown, but is advised that going after a local hero is bad optics. He instead decides to orchestrate a scenario where she makes herself look bad. Officer Garcia tells Bibi that it's only a matter of time before they track down exactly who and where she is. Bibi then asks Eddie if he could get her mech up and running, and he promptly gets to it. While he's out gathering parts from this really cool looking lady, Morrow begins their staged attack. Using active camo drones, they set off explosive near Bibi's parents' restaurant, under the guise of being a Salvation Gang attack. The plan is to fake an attack to overwhelm the Dead Lucky while Morrow's guardian robots save the day, already knowing about the attack. The restaurant catches fire and her father is unfortunately stuck inside. She rushes into the burning building and finds him trapped under rubble. Not giving up, Bibi unlocks a new ability and has the ghosts of her squad mates possess the Morrow bots. The robots then help Bibi rescue her father. Looking possessed herself, comes out of the building and flies off after her father is safe. Bibi heads to a forest, but actually sees instead a different realm of existence. In the land of the dead, her squad mates are able to communicate with her and tell her that they'll always be there for her. We learn that Bibi's powers are more than electricity. In her words, "I can see electrical currents, the energy that people leave behind. It's attracted to me somehow." Bibi's mech is powered and possessed by one of her fallen squad mates. While Bibi is in the land of the dead, Morrow begins cracking down on dissenters and installs a citywide curfew, enforced by more patrol bots. The Dead Lucky returns and tries to take out as many checkpoints as she can, but she realizes it's too much on her own. She reconvenes with her team, and in a risky move, she decides to cooperate with the Salvation Gang. Now with more resources and numbers, Bibi is given 3 more mechs to possess, with the Salvation Gang saying that since she's able to control multiple bots, she could probably also control multiple mechs. Bibi is skeptical and says she isn't even sure how her powers work. This prompts a voice to ask, how about a demonstration? And out of nowhere, Shift jumps down and starts attacking Bibi. He's pushed away by Bibi's ghost when the Salvation Gang steps in and vouches for Shift. A Salvation Gang leader says that they hired him because he also hates Morrow, and brought his own bot to mercenaries. Once everything is cleared, Bibi explains the plan to bring down Morrow. They'll first focus on taking out Morrow's robot legion that's being held at a warehouse. This will both hurt Morrow's offenses and act as a distraction. The second part of the plan is that while Morrow focuses on the main attack, a second smaller squad will go after Moss at his headquarters. Preparations for the attack take some hours, which gives everyone enough time to get their affairs in order. Bibi and Shift have a talk where he offers Bibi a position as an operator, and that it will make her a lot of money. Bibi says she can't be bought. Their conversation is interrupted when the lights go out and an explosion goes off. Their base is under attack by Morrow and everyone scrambles to recover. The battle is taken outside where Shift brings in his mercenaries for help. Bibi joins back with her ghost possessing the rest of the mechs, and they quickly take care of Morrow's larger robots. In the middle of the firefight, Eddie calls the Dead Lucky, warning her about the ambush, but that Morrow isn't interested in the Salvation Gang, but in her. So long as she's there, Morrow won't let up. Meanwhile, Shift takes out a leader on Morrow's side and confirms to Bibi that one of the leaders in the Salvation Gang was the snitch. Overwhelmed, the Dead Lucky asks Shift for backup, but he says that since the mission's changed, his contract is done and wishes her good luck. The Dead Lucky and the remaining Salvation Gang members find cover in a warehouse. They take a breather and come up with a plan to have everyone sneak out while the Dead Lucky keeps Morrow busy. She faces Morrow's army. The captain orders an air guardian to fire on her. Before she's taken out, Eddie arrives piloting a mech and takes on the air guardian. Unfortunately, the clash ends in an explosion taking out both machines. Bibi looks on in horror, and in a painful scream, she unleashes bolts of electricity that possess Morrow's bots and run the rest of Morrow's forces away. Bibi finds Eddie's body and desperately looks around for his ghost, but finds nothing. We also see Jimmy Moss was watching the whole thing. Eventually, he shows up and talks with BB himself. Days later, we see the results of their talk. In a news conference, we learn that BB made a deal with Moss. All Salvation Gang members get immunity, and in exchange, she joins Morrow as head of their Special Crimes Division. In the end, Morrow is allowed to continue their occupation due to showing real results at improving San Francisco, and that they also plan to expand to other cities. The last note in BB's story is that she is not surrendering to Morrow, but instead is now shifting to burning it down from the inside. This is where the Dead Lucky's story ends for now. Back to Radiant Black, Marshall exits from existence back at his home and rushes to the hospital where he sees Nathan already learning how to walk. Nathan then tells Marshall that it's actually been 6 weeks since he woke up. As Marshall tries to fix the issues caused from his long absence, Radiant Pink reaches out to him asking for a quick team-up stream. The two then run into Doppler and follow her to Shift's base of operations. There, Marshall discovers Shift's business and learns about engineers Jason Riley. While Marshall and Pink clean up after Doppler, the robot makes contact with Nathan to his horror. This shows that Nathan is still connected to the Radiant somehow. And now we finally arrive to the landmark moment in the timeline. In a cold open in the Wisconsin wilderness, Inferno Girl Red explodes onto the scene along with a monster. The only dialogue we get explaining how or why she's here is her saying that this isn't right and that the monster's meddling knocked her off course. She winds up knocking it into the air where it lands miles away. We're then shown somewhere else in the Wisconsin wilderness where Jace, one of the engineers in Shift's business, is trekking around. Jace and Riley have picked up energy readings that are reminiscent of the Radiant Black energy, and plan to use whatever's giving off that energy to charge the Radiant tech. Unfortunately, the monster lands by Jace and proceeds to eat and assimilate him as Riley listens in horror. 4 hours earlier in New Orleans, we're introduced to the current Rogue Sun, a magic-based superhero who protects the world from magical threats. After defeating one of his villains, he picks up on a magical distress call in Wisconsin and proceeds to fly there. Around the same time, Nathan and Marshall are watching a movie when the robot reaches out to Marshall, letting him know that something has crossed realities and poses a great danger. Marshall then heads to check it out. Back to Inferno Girl Red, she searches for the monster when Rogue Sun shows up and bluntly tells her that she can either go back to her own universe or be taken into custody. She says that she'll leave just as soon as she handles the monster that came in with her. He says he'll handle it, and before they start to butt heads, they get frozen in place thanks to Radiant Black's arrival. Radiant Black and Inferno Girl Red exchange names, and Marshall says that he's a huge fan of Rogue Sun, a feeling that's unrequited. The monster then roars in the background and slowly approaches the three heroes. They begin to fly and fire at it. The technology that Jace was wearing allows the monster to absorb and siphon off the energy. Before they realize that the monster is immune to their attacks and even grows off of it, it's overcharged, causing a massive explosion. In the explosion, the three heroes receive premonitions. All are significant, but Rogue Sun is worth mentioning as it shows his own funeral. The monster escapes as their heroes try to recover but are in great pain. They try to suit up, but none of them can. They panic a bit, but they calm down and decide to get out of the forest. Rogue Sun, aka Marcus Bell, rents a car and the three begin chasing the monster. A radio says that it's already traveled 400 miles, which lets the heroes bond a bit over the days-long road trip. Eventually, they catch up to the monster, and they suppose that if they can disconnect the energy storage units from its back, they can depower it and possibly get their powers back. They agree on their half-assed plan and charge at the monster. They work together and Cassia manages to smash a power unit, releasing their powers. In doing so, the monster's size grows. With their powers back, they transform in this fantastic fold-out. They play it smart, keeping their distance, but make no progress hurting the monster. Marshall comes up with a plan that involves railgunning the monster, but it doesn't bring it down. It turns out Marshall's real plan was to charge himself with enough energy to summon the robot. It bursts out of Radiant Black, and with the help of Rogue Sun and Inferno Girl Red, it fires one last beam at the monster and finally ends the fight. They head to a barn that Marcus owns and they begin to say goodbye. Cassia hopes to meet them again and departs for her universe. Marshall and Marcus have a one-to-one talking about the possible threats heading to Earth and ultimately decide that they'll just have to be strong enough when the day comes. Right before the crossover ends, we get an extra page showing a grassy field. In the middle of the field is a monster resembling the ones from Inferno Girl Red. It's then immediately crushed by a robot. We see that the robot was actually the dead Lucky's mech. She mentions she hopes he doesn't miss the party next time. This is where Rogue Sun's story begins. After the team-up, Marcus goes back to New Orleans where he's back fighting another new enemy. In a sudden turn, the powerful villain kills him. In comes high school bully Dylan. We learn that Dylan is Marcus's son, whom he abandoned 15 years ago along with his mother. Dylan and his mother are contacted and invited to a reading of Marcus's will. There, Dylan meets Marcus's other family, his current wife and widow, Juliet, and his other children, Brock and Ari. They go through the will, and it turns out that Marcus had left his most prized possession, the Sunstone, to Dylan, to his other children's disbelief and envy. It's revealed to Dylan that Marcus was the superhero Rogue Sun and passing the mantle to him. While Dylan takes this information in, elsewhere, a gang of masked goons begin to rob an auction. Back to Dylan and his mother, he asks questions about his father, and soon he receives the call, a signal from the stone letting him know that Rogue Son is needed. With the promise that he'll do better than his father, he activates the stone and transforms into Rogue Son. He catches up to the goons from before, and sadly, but unsurprisingly, Dylan gets bodied and the bad guys get away. To add insult to injury, Marcus appears and tells Dylan he's embarrassed. As Dylan gets into the superhero life, we learn Marcus's soul bonded to the Sunstone sometime during his death, and this allows Dylan to communicate with him while he wears the suit. Marcus has bad parenting skills, however, and instead of guidance, he only causes friction and stress. Dylan would go on ignoring his father's advice until Marcus eventually tells the truth. He didn't leave the Sunstone to Dylan because he believed in him, but because Marcus knew he was targeted and killed by someone close, and that whoever took up the Rogue Son mantle would be a target. Not wanting any of his children to be in the crosshairs, Marcus had Dylan be the sacrificial lamb. Marcus and Dylan then make a deal. Dylan helps solve Marcus's murder, and in exchange, Marcus lifts the spell and leaves forever. Later, Dylan meets Dottie Perrin, a friend of the family. She's in charge of magic containment. She traps Rogue Son's villains in jewels and hangs them in a large chandelier while she works on rehabilitating them. Later, we see Ori had broken a villain out of Dottie's chandelier and plans to have them take the Sunstone. The creature she summoned is Demonica, and one of Rogue Son's most powerful villains. Demonica starts wreaking havoc in town when Dylan gets the call and flies to her. While they fight, Dottie confronts Ori over what she did. Ori admits that she only released Demonica to weaken Dylan enough to remove the Sunstone. Her motives being that she believes Dylan doesn't deserve the Sunstone. Anyways, back to the fight, Rogue Son is eventually put on his back and helpless. Before Demonica can drain him dead, Marcus's killer appears and blasts her away. Marcus begs Dylan to get up, but the green shrouded figure tells Dylan not to worry, that she only wants to speak with Marcus. As she unhoods herself, we see Marcus's killer was Dylan's mother, Gwen. Marcus and Gwen begin to argue through Dylan, but the weight of it all is too much for him and has a small breakdown. Demonica comes back into the fight, and Dylan and his mother turn their attention on her and they fight her together. Marcus, however, urges Dylan to take out his mother while she's distracted, but of course he refuses. As they fight, we get flashbacks between Gwen and Marcus's past to better understand what led up to the murder. In a flashback to just 6 months ago, Marcus had actually visited Gwen with hopes to talk about Dylan, saying he needs a positive male role model. She reasonably laughs and rejects his offer to come back into Dylan's life after leaving him for 15 years. Marcus backs off for now, but in a real scumbag move, he tells Gwen that he is a superhero and that if he wants to see his kid, how is she going to stop him? With the motivation and desperation to protect her son, she quickly finds someone to bestow her the power to kill Rogue Son. In return, she forfeits her soul to the being offering her the power. Back to the fight, Gwen manages to subdue Demonica. She then turns her attention to Dylan and explains everything she's done was to protect him from Marcus, but after learning that Marcus was still inside the stone, she had to intervene again, and now wants Dylan to give up the stone. He refuses and the fight turns into a chase. Gwen and Marcus argue again using Dylan as a middleman to communicate. Marcus at one point becomes so enraged he somehow possesses Dylan's body and punches his ex-wife. This prompts Gwen to use the power that allowed her to kill Rogue Son. Dylan is incapacitated as his mother offers to stop the pain when he gives up the Sunstone. Dylan reluctantly uses his most powerful attack, the Blackfire, on his mother. The attack is enough to knock her down and ends the fight. Dylan then brings his mother to Dottie and has no choice but to contain her while they work on removing her powers. Dylan then speaks with his father, saying that since his murder is solved, he can leave the suit. They argue, but ultimately Marcus releases his soul from the stone and is gone for good. With his mother gone, Juliet adopts Dylan and moves him into the mansion. We'll leave Rogue Son for now. Back to Radiant Black, Nathan is released from the hospital, but is still ignoring the calls from the robot. Meanwhile, Marshall's rogues gallery starts pushing him and he responds with brutality. Marshall eventually hunts down and destroys Shift's business. Marshall's aggression would cause him and Nathan to argue over his use of the Radiant. In the end, Nathan agrees to back off, but decides to accept the robot's call. Nathan finds out that the robot admits it too doesn't know what's going on or how they're able to still communicate. Sometime later, Shift would break his crew out of jail and plan to take down Radiant Black. They eventually track down Radiant Black, and by the end, they have him bleeding out on the floor. Shift offers a deal where Marshall looks the other way of his operations in exchange for money. Marshall refuses and Shift gives the order to kill him. Suddenly, a second Radiant Black saves Marshall. Turns out, Radiant Yellow picked up Nathan and tells him to go save Marshall. On the drive there, the robot then tells Nathan that for the duration of his life, he is part of existence and is still Radiant Black. Nathan then transforms and saves Marshall. Nathan fends off against the operators while Marshall recuperates. Doppler positions herself to take out Radiant Black. Radiant Yellow catches up to her and hands her a hammer to instead help Radiant Black. Throughout the series, Doppler never meant to harm anyone. She just needed to keep her suit running to treat her disorder, and was against killing Marshall and hoped that he would take up Schiff's deal. She uses the hammer to incapacitate everyone and reverts Nathan back to normal. Schiff tries to backstab Nathan, but is sucker punched by Radiant Black. This time, it's Marshall. They realize that they can switch back and forth, and Nathan and Marshall tag team Schiff and end the fight. Riley, the other engineer, exits his suit and triggers a failsafe. The result is classified information on Radiant technology is leaked to the public. The criminals are then apprehended except for Schiff, who got away. Later, Nathan visits Radiant Yellow to thank him for helping save Marshall's life. Wendell's expression, however, shows that he had predicted and wanted Marshall to die. Wendell then mutters, "He's going to kill everyone." We'll take a break from Radiant Black for now. Going back to Rogue Sun, his very first villain, Suave, tries to steal something called the Quill. Dylan gets the call to stop him, and this time, Dylan wins the fight. Suave retreats while his henchmen handle Rogue Sun. Dylan beats up one henchman in particular and kind of leaves him for dead. The henchman is later brought to a hospital with internal injuries and a severe head wound. The henchman's son visits his father and wants revenge. The son's name is Hunter. Hunter is then called out to by the same entity that gave power to Dylan's mother. The entity promises Hunter power in exchange for a soul. Hunter accepts and is given a magic sword. Days later, Dylan is called to a bank robbery, but it was actually a trap. Hunter, calling himself Hellbent, ambushes him and easily pins Dylan to a wall. Hellbent wants to kill him then and there, but the entity wants Dylan to retrieve something called the Quill. He has 48 hours or else Hellbent will kill his friends and family. Dylan flies back home and takes some time to heal. While Dylan recovers, Brock sneaks in and takes the Sunstone. He and Ari had been planning to bring Marcus back to the Sunstone, believing Dylan still needs the guidance. The ritual they perform is technically successful, but instead of summoning Marcus, they summon Caleb, the very first Rogue Son. Dylan recovers and Brock and Ari come clean over what they've done. Caleb insists that since he's here, he can help guide Dylan. Dylan visits Dottie to see if she can help him find the Quill, only so he can use it as bait. Dottie tells him that she can't do that. She explains that there are several dimensions and realities out there, and in one of them there exists a creature called Morningstar, who wants to take over this dimension. It isn't able to cross over, but it can still influence people as a voice. Morningstar preys on people's wishes and desires, and gives it to them in exchange for their soul and service. Morningstar is essentially the cause of all monsters, and is essentially the sole force that Rogue Sun has been fighting for generations. Dottie then explains that the Quill is capable of bridging worlds, and so Morningstar must not have it. Dylan then turns to Caleb for help instead. He discloses that the Quill is hidden in a pocket dimension called the Avery, and is in the possession of the Raven Queen. Caleb instructs Dylan how to reach the Avery, and they eventually meet with the Queen. She says that she'll hand it over only if Dylan can beat the doorman to the Avery in combat. Dylan is outmatched, however, and Caleb offers to switch in. Dylan insists that he has to do this himself, and so Caleb instead summons a sword to help. Eventually, Dylan manages to pull a miracle and wins, earning the Quill. Meanwhile, the henchman that Rogue Sun put in the hospital recovers. After learning his son had made a deal with Morningstar, like him, he strikes another deal to end his son's services. In exchange for more power, he'll kill Rogue Sun and steal the Quill himself. Morningstar accepts and gives the henchman the power to do so. Dylan returns from the Avery when Dottie calls to him to let him know that Hellbent has run out of patience and is going after Dylan's friends. Hellbent then crashes Dylan's high school prom and holds the students hostage. Rogue Sun arrives and threatens to burn the Quill. The stalemate is interrupted when a Juggernaut crashes through the wall. The Juggernaut is Hellbent's father. He urges his son to let him kill Rogue Sun and retrieve the Quill to free the debt to Morningstar. Hellbent says he actually loves the power. The father-son duo end up beating Rogue Sun down. Before they kill him, one of Dylan's classmates picks up Rogue Sun's sword and stands in the way. Hellbent takes things too far and stabs him dead. Overwhelmed, Dylan lets Caleb take control of his body. Caleb begins overpowering the two villains, pinning Hellbent to the wall and swiftly beheading the Juggernaut. Dylan asks Caleb not to kill Hellbent, saying that watching his father die is suffering enough. When the villain's defeated, Dylan brings Hellbent to Dottie for containment. He also gives her the Quill to destroy it. Dylan and Caleb talk about the events, and after finding a new resolve, Dylan says he is ready to switch back. Caleb unfortunately does not want to switch back and says his experience makes him a better Rogue Son. Dylan must now find a way to get his body back. Meanwhile, Suave is contacted by Morningstar, who has grown tired of all the failures and plans to bring revelation to the world. This is the end of Rogue Sun's story for now. Coming back to Radiant Black, Marshall and Nathan begin crime fighting as a duo. Meanwhile, a giant alien pillar lands in Brazil. Marshall and Pink get the news about it and head to Brazil. Nathan, on the other hand, sees that his family got donated a large sum of money by who he recognizes as Satomi's fiancée. Nathan then visits Satomi in jail and makes peace with her. Nathan also tells Satomi that he can feel a war approaching soon. He believes that there's forces that want the Radiance back. Meanwhile, the giant pillar opens up and transforms into one of the robots that Marshall and Pink saw in space. They begin to fight, but the robot is too durable. Focusing more on keeping people safe, Pink portals the robot into the middle of the ocean. Eva and Marshall return home and meet up with Nathan. The three try to sort things out when the robot pops back up. They get to the robot and try fighting it again. Pink then gets the idea to get help from Satomi. She portals to her cell but has to do some convincing first. Meanwhile, Nathan and Marshall tag team the robot when suddenly the Radiant stops working, and neither can transform into Radiant Black. Before the robot crushes them, Radiant Red smashes the robot's leg. They get to work destroying the robot and eventually win. Satomi is brought back to jail and Ava sends the robot parts to Marshall's garage so that Shift doesn't get his hands on them. We'll come back to Radiant Black. It's around this time that I believe Radiant Pink begins her own adventure. Radiant Pink puts together a charity stream for a children's hospital. Unfortunately, a terrorist group planning to charge their own Radiant tech plant explosives in the building. Radiant Pink gets to work evacuating all the patients. Fortunately, Pink gets the help of an EMT named Kelly who directs her where everyone is. When the last patient is safe, Eva and Kelly are the last ones to evacuate. Pink, however, has reached her limit. She forces out one last portal, but it's black and jagged. They jump through and find themselves on an alien planet. We're then shown in a flashback that Kelly was actually in on the attack. We see her talking to the perpetrators of the explosion and wearing a vest most likely made out of Radiant tech. Pink wastes no time opening up portals again, but instead of Earth, they jump to different hostile worlds. They take a break from portal jumping and Kelly starts flirting with Eva. It's so effective on Eva that it lowers her guard enough to unmask herself, and Kelly learns her secret identity. They're soon attacked again by a gelatinous monster when they portal one more time to an even stranger planet and discover a cat-shaped vessel in the distance. Boarding the ship, Kelly notices that the technology inside could make them a fortune, and they should take it. They're attacked once again, this time by a giant cat monster. Eva is too exhausted to defend them, and so Kelly blows her cover to use the vest on the cat monster. Eva witnesses in horror Kelly crushing the cat when she passes out. Kelly stops her assault on the cat to come to Ava's aid. After several hours, Eva comes to and she and Kelly get into an argument. Eva is reasonably upset that Kelly agreed to be part of a kid's hospital bombing, but Kelly insists that she only agreed to wear the vest made out of Radiant tech and charge it by getting close to Radiant Pink. An enraged Eva dismisses Kelly's defense and starts swinging. Eva ends up opening another portal that transports them and the ship to a desert world. Kelly actually overpowers Eva because her vest has been siphoning energy from Eva the whole time, and put Eva in a weakened state. Kelly uses the opportunity to calm Eva down. They come to an agreement to stop fighting and Eva will start trusting Kelly again, but she has to take off the vest first. To Kelly's distress, it's actually fused to her spine. At that moment, the cat monster wakes up and pounces on them, but soon whimpers. The cat then presses a button that translates his meows into English, which allows him to introduce himself as Kitty Kitty. He explains that his crew perished some time ago and wants to return home. Eva tries opening a portal but doesn't recognize where it leads to. As you can see, she's actually found Apex City, the home of Inferno Girl Red. Kitty Kitty instead asks that Kelly and Eva use their opposable thumbs to help get the escape pod up and running. Just then, it begins to rain, but the rain is sentient and is a hostile organism that begins to eat through the ship. The three rush to the escape pod and launch to the atmosphere. The tension breaks when Eva and Kelly share a kiss. A few days later, they make it to Kitty Kitty's planet where he leaves them in a room to relax while he talks to his leaders. The two enjoy their privacy when sometime later, Kitty Kitty returns with guards behind him. He lied about wanting to help them, saying that Eva and Kelly having opposable thumbs makes them valuable as servants. Eva and Kelly fight their way through the guards, but Eva, still being drained by the vest, is too exhausted to continue. This leads to Kelly savagely tearing apart the cats. Eva pushes herself and Kelly through a portal into deep space, and while Eva is fine, Kelly begins to suffocate. Eva panics when suddenly a voice calls out to her. She appears in existence and is confronted with the robot of her Radiant. Eva then begs the robot to help. The robot lets her know that it can make a jump to Earth, but that adding Kelly into the equation makes it a very risky jump. Eva accepts the odds and luckily they make it. Pink and Kelly crash back into the Earth, and after ensuring that both are okay, they share another kiss. Her story continues in the final issue set to release soon. Sometime after the robot attack, the US government requests a meeting with Radiant Black. Nathan agrees and meets with Kieran, a representative of the United States Postal Inspection Service. The robot had crushed a post office first until the jurisdiction falls under them. Kieran tells Radiant Black he wants to build a relationship. Radiant Black is asked to bring in Shift, who's been transporting illegal weapons through the mail. Nathan debriefs Marshall and they talk about whether or not they should work with the post office. They then get visited by Wendell, who tells them to do the Shift job and gives them an address and time of where Shift will be. Wendell then tells them that there are more robots coming. He also says that bringing in Shift helps keep the war at bay. Wendell then gets to work hacking the robot. Nathan and Marshall fly to Shift's location, but on the way there, the Radiant stops working and they begin to fall. Nathan luckily transforms just in time. Anyways, they find Guy waiting at a diner. Nathan approaches him and they talk about the war that's coming. Guy says he doesn't care, he's just in it for the money. Guy says he won't come quietly and they begin to fight. Nathan and Marshall win and bring Shift to Kieran with the suit destroyed. Meanwhile, Wendell hacks the robot but finds out too late that it had already sent a signal. He rushes to tell Nathan and Marshall, but a squad of robots ambush them. The robot destroys Marshall's home and hurt his dog in the process. Overwhelmed with rage, Marshall enters Radiant Rage mode and makes short work of the robots. He manages to destroy dozens when the powers glitch out again and he's left vulnerable. Thankfully, the last robot is wrecked when Nathan runs into it with a bus. At this point, the Radiant is too glitchy to depend on and they must fix it before the rest of the Armada reaches Earth. Wendell says he knows who to turn to. Wendell takes them to the ship 001 used to get to Earth. Through the console, 001 appears and communicates with Nathan and Marshall that they will have to return to existence and give truth in exchange for favor. Nathan and Marshall accept the terms and travel back to existence. Once there, Nathan and Marshall go on their own journey of self-discovery. Ultimately, Nathan confesses to Marshall he wants to move back to LA and try to be a successful writer again, saying he's not who he was before. Though Marshall isn't thrilled to hear his best friend is moving away again, he says they can work things out and that the robot will fix the Radiant. Nathan adds that he also plans to take the Radiant with him, admitting that he doesn't want Marshall hurting anyone. Marshall is heartbroken, but pleads he doesn't want to hurt people. He wants to protect his friends and do something meaningful. Marshall begs that he's better, but Nathan says it's not what he wants, but that it's the truth. With that, the Radiant manifests and Nathan grabs hold of it. The Radiant robot is revived and begins to speak to them. It tells them that the Radiant is not broken, but that it was only meant to sync with one person, and so they must decide who will be Radiant Black. The very last panel in the Radiant Black series so far has the robot look directly at us and has us decide. Scanning that QR code takes you to a poll where you can vote for who you want to continue as Radiant Black. At the time of this video's release, there's still time to vote. And with that, you're all caught up to the Supermassiverse, and thank you very much for watching.